Hey everyone, I'm Connor.
And I'm Jeff.
And this is the Sad Boy Sessions, Emotional Identity in Christ. So, hey, thanks for joining us. This is our second episode. A couple weeks ago was the first one. We discussed sadness and how we see that manifesting itself in our lives over short term and historically over our lives. But ultimately, we want this to be a podcast that is rooted in Jesus Christ and him being at the center of it, and sort of, I guess it can be tailored to believers, but doesn't necessarily have to be. But we as self-proclaimed sad boys are, in theory, in tune with our emotions, and we think it's a good thing to be in tune with your emotions, and particularly if you're a guy, and that it's just the world will tell you otherwise. So here we are, episode 2. Last time we talked about sadness. This time we're talking about anger,
Which is really like sadness's little cousin, isn't it?
It is, yeah. It's for sure related,
or bigger. I don't know. I guess it depends on the individual.
Yeah, what is it? What does Yoda say? Which comes first? Anger, sadness? Sadness leads to anger.
Yes.
Yeah.
That sounds right.
It does sound right, but I've also very much had it where anger leads to sadness.
Yoda may have been wrong.
Well, I don't want to speak ill of the man.
We can go on a whole different route tonight.
All right, remix. We're talking about Star Wars for an hour and a half. So, yeah, we want to talk about every episode. It's going to be a different emotion will be the topic, and then if it's a negative emotion, we want to sort of lift it up at the end and see in Scripture what does Scripture have to say about that emotion? What kind of hope does it give? And so this time we're talking about anger. So let me start off by asking you this, Jeff. Over the past couple weeks, when and where have you seen anger manifest itself in your life?
Yeah. I think this is actually, I don't want to say sad, but there is truth to the fact that I have recently delved more deeply back into online gaming.
Oh, Halo Infinite.
Halo Infinite has hit my Xbox, and I'm not gonna lie. There's a point to this actually. I have felt, and I think my friends that play with me can attest to this, like some actual anger while playing this online video game, which may sound silly, but we all have our things. And I think for me, the reason that I actually have these like moments of like real frustration and anger is somewhere deep down for the last 20 years, I've told myself that I'm a gamer and I'm good at this. And then here's me like, now in my late 20s, like not being as good as I once was.
Yeah.
And so there's actually like an identity issue when it comes to Halo where I'm like, I should be really good at this particular activity. And I know it seems silly, but I'm sure some people it's like sports, some people it's, like a different kind of performance oriented thing. But there is something in my identity that's tied up with video games, just because that's one of the pastimes that me and my buddies have had for 20-something years at this point. And last couple of weeks, like the most notable points were like I think I've definitely felt anger outside of it, but that is when I have like the most uncontrolled like actual rage where I'm just like saying vulgar stuff to be quite frank. And so it kind of a silly idea, but I think underneath the video games aspect of it is there is like this identity piece, and I feel like for me that's always a trigger, is something about my identity being threatened, or am I being what I can perceive to be unfairly delayed or unfairly, because traffic's another classic example. I think I've actually conquered my road rage by this age, which I'm like so happy about. I used to be such an impatient driver when I was younger, and then like something flipped like a few years back where I was just like, if I leave with enough time, it doesn't really matter what traffic looks like.
Imagine
and I'll get
that.
there. Yeah, it's like I'll get there on time. I can just listen to a podcast or listen to music, and it's like I'll get there. It's gonna be fine. So
And driving's fun.
and driving can be fun. Yeah, it's nice when you don't have that like, oh, I'm 5 minutes late feeling all the time.
Yeah.
So those are kind of like some funny surface level examples, but I think underneath them there is. I think definitely for me, a big trigger is this idea of like my self-perceived ideal of fairness. Like when I get mad at Halo, it's not like, for me, it feels unfair. It's not that I suck, but
It can't be that you
exactly, because it's like it must be unfair, because if it is I suck, then I'm really mad at myself, and then that is where my anger leads to despair, because this thing that I think is so important to me, I'm just not good at anymore. So yeah, I just think it's maybe some might consider it to be a slightly silly example, but it's the truth. for whatever that is for me. I don't know. What about you?
It is a very real example. That's something that, oh yeah, Halo. I have very fond and also unfond memories of Halo, and that's partly like nowadays it's Call of Duty 2, and it's just like, I remember back in high school, that was when I got a 360. I'm talking like junior year of high school, around 2008. So Halo 3 just come out.
A golden era, really.
World at War, Modern Warfare 2, I think was coming out probably like the year after that, give or take. Black Ops. And like you said, identity has a lot to do with it. My identity was, I'm really good at this and no one can tell me otherwise. And it's because like it puts you in this world where you're not who you really are, and you're able to create this like artificial worth of your character, your video game character, and it's like, yeah, look at my level, look at all my XP, look at all this stuff,
prestige.
Yeah, look at my KD ratio. It was like, there's a funny joke way back in the day where it's like you're proposing to your girlfriend, or you have to go to her dad and ask for his blessing, and he's like, well, what's your KD?
Luckily, I didn't have to do that.
Yeah, if it's under 1, you got a big problem. Yeah, so, yeah. But I think nowadays for me, when it comes to video games, like I just don't play them as much anymore, in part because like I work full time. I just don't have time to do it, which honestly, thank God. They bring joy, but they bring great rage. Which is like,
well, it's funny because I mean, we have like, the terminology is there, like, and I know I'm not alone in this, because in the midst of playing Halo, I've seen others rage quit.
Yeah.
While I'm playing, you're losing really bad, and you just see so and so left, and so it's like, it's nice to know that I'm not alone out there. Rage quitting is still very much part of gamer culture, I feel like.
And it feels fantastic when you're the one who makes them rage quit.
Oh yeah, 100%. If you're winning so hard that someone's just like, you know what, I'm not even gonna finish this game. Like, there's something utterly satisfying about that, but yet you've now inflicted upon them this horrific feeling that you sometimes have. So
yeah,
there's some. We could talk about vengeance later, but to me, that's kind of what it feels like.
Yeah. But well, yeah. So like I was saying, like with video games nowadays, being that I'm 29 and a half years old, I just don't have the time for it. And like with Call of Duty, how it's sort of evolved into the whole Warzone thing is like all the rage now, all these battle royales where it's like, okay, if you're doing solos, there's literally only one winner and 99 people are going to lose. Chances are you're going to lose. And you know that going in. And there's always going to be something funky that happens where like you're shooting a guy and you like on your end, it seems like you're lighting him up. And it's like, I hit him 5 times. And then you get hit like twice and you die. And then it's like, what the heck? but then it shows the replay, and on his end he hits you like 8 times, but it just doesn't register.
The internet.
Yeah, the lag. But nowadays it's like I just don't play Call of Duty that much anymore. I'm just more so into solo campaigns, and I don't play things on
Definitely
veteran anymore.
way more relaxing. Yeah, just cruising through it.
Yeah,
getting the story, getting the good like mechanics of the game.
Yeah, and now that like achievements and trophies in video games don't matter to me, I don't have any reason to play a campaign on veteran. Why waste my time? Why cause my blood to boil for something that literally doesn't matter? So nowadays it's like the only things I play, it's like I'll play 2K, but I only do my career mode. I don't play online against people because sports games online
They've always been finicky. I'm
Yeah.
sorry. I've never found them to be like quality competitive games in my entire life. I guess FIFA's the one that's probably the biggest like worldwide, but even then I abhor FIFA when I'm playing someone online because people are so good at it.
Yeah. So there's lag involved. It's just like, I don't need this. I just want to keep to myself. I don't really need to play video games against people anymore. Maybe I'll chime in from time to time, but other than that, forget it. It just causes rage where it doesn't need to exist. So with the recent addition of Halo Infinite into your life and thinking about an instance where you got angry at it, in that moment, what did you do to mitigate that? How long after the anger began did it take for you to like step out of, like, kind of exit your body and be like, wait, what's happening right now? Why am I angry at this?
Honestly, probably now recording this. Like, that's the thing, is because you stay in the stimulus when it comes to games. Like, I feel like if I have a bad match, I need to make up for it. And because I'm angry, I don't play well. And so I just go down this downward spiral. And I know, I'm self-aware that I'm like, you're not enjoying this seemingly. You're trying to, like, play better. But by trying to play better, you play worse. Like, you know, it's just, I do not have that, like, calm, like, take a deep breath. I actually do sometimes. But today I was just like, I think it was the internet. My internet's been down. My internet was down all day yesterday. And it was spotty Friday, so I was just excited to get on, play some Halo, and then just get absolutely shredded a couple games in a row. And I was just like, screw this. Like, why am I even spending my time doing this? But it is funny that I'll just kind of stay in that loop of frustration rather than just like, you know what, maybe just put it down, go take a walk, come back later today or another time. And I think part of it is, you know, for me it is still social. I don't necessarily feel the need to play games against people, but it is a chance for me to play with buddies that don't necessarily live nearby. Like, I've got a buddy in Nashville, and you know, my brother lives in St. Cloud, so yeah, it's like 45 hour away, so I don't get to see him in person as much as we used to. And so if, like, you know, and we all kind of work from home now, which is a whole different thing, but you know, just, you know, 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock rolls around. It's like, oh, hey, let's all hop on and do this thing. Like, I would rather spend that time with them, but I quickly lose sight of, oh, I'm doing this to connect with my friend and my brother, and more just like we're screaming at each other, like, pick up the stupid thing. You know, it's just like, why aren't you doing what you're supposed to do? There's still camaraderie in there somewhere, but yeah, we definitely have better days and we have not so good days. But I feel like you could say the same thing for like anything competitive. I feel like sports, I mean, I'm sure you have potentially something to share there. You're more sporting than I am. But yeah, I think anything competitive where you're kind of putting your perceived worth up against other people, I think is a source of a lot of anger for people.
Yeah, so I guess on that topic, this past Saturday was the first time that I played volleyball in probably like 9 months. Since last time I played it, I rage quit. I was like, I'm absolutely done with this game. And part of this goes into, like, with sport specifically, like volleyball is one where comparing myself to like our friend group who plays, I feel like I'm like towards the top of like the volleyball skill or what I'm capable of. Whereas like if you're putting me in the Olympics with other guys, it's like not even going to be a discussion. But it's like, I think based on this group, I'm one of the better players here. And when that thought crosses my mind, that's when like the hyper competitiveness in me, that switch flicks, because it's something that I'm convinced there's no reason I shouldn't win this, given how confident I am in my abilities in it. And if I don't win, especially with volleyball, where it's like they might not hit the ball to you, like you can go.
Yeah, it's a team sport. It's not all in one person's hands ever.
Yeah, and it's like the person serving it on the other team, maybe they're having a great round and they just hit like 5 straight aces, and it's like, but you're not even in a spot where you're the person that they would be hitting it to, so you're helpless, and you just see your team losing, and you can't do anything about it. And then, but yeah, as a team sport, it's like, all right, well then there's some people who will come out and like we just play it recreationally, but not everyone has the same sense of competition that I do. And so there's some people who show up to just be like, oh, this is a fun thing to do. We just kind of fool around on a Saturday morning. We're with
I
friends.
get to touch the ball.
Yeah, but I also have no idea what I'm doing and that kind of thing. Whereas, so you have like that mixture, and it's like this person's on my team and they have no idea what they're doing and don't really seem to want to figure out how to do this game or how to play this game. Whereas, and I'm just standing there stewing because they're incompetent at it. And it's like, what did you come out here for? And it's like, well, yeah, well, not everyone came out here for the same reason you did, Connor. Calm down. And
amen to that.
And so that's something where, like this past Saturday, I went out and I was like, okay, let me try and go out here. And I say this like even back in the day, where it's like, all right, let me go out here. Let me realize why I'm out here. Let me calm down, not be super competitive. And it's like, I can say that a lot of times, but I mean, if push comes to shove, the competition level in me is probably going to turn on. If it's a close game, if it's 19-19 and like I've lost 2 games in a row and it's like, I can't lose a third. I can't be coming out here wasting my time losing games. And so it's like, it's such a stupid thing. But I think for me, and I think like over this past year, that's something where like I've kind of just stopped playing sports altogether over the past several months, was because I noticed like really what I'll play is volleyball and basketball. Mm-hmm. 2 things where like I feel like I'm better at volleyball than I am at basketball. But then sometimes with basketball, it's like like nothing's going your way. You're getting good looks. The ball's just not going in. It's really frustrating. You're blowing layups. It's like, how old am I that I can't make a layup? And so I just like those 2 things that I would play religiously over the past several months. I was just like, I'm not doing this anymore. It's bringing me nothing but anger. But then the question is it really the sport that is bringing me the anger, or is there something rooted inside of me that is doing that? That's
a great question to ask. I think, no matter what it is, whether it's Halo or volleyball or basketball or traffic, I always think, one thing, I don't know if we talked about this last episode when it came to sadness, but one thing I think for sure with anger and I think what we perceive to be negative emotions, really all emotions, is like, to me, emotions in and of themselves are kind of innocuous. Like to maybe say some are good, some are bad. I don't even necessarily want to like flavor them that way, but I consider like emotions are like signposts that something else is happening.
Yep.
Like I'm having a reaction emotionally, which tells me something about my identity or my, perception of what my reality is like being threatened, mm-hmm. or is like super lining up. Like if we talk about happiness and elation, it's like, wow, like this is what I would like perceive to be my happy place. Like this is awesome. But I think when it comes to anger, like I can see how it's really frustrating when you're cut off in traffic, but I think a lot of people just get stuck in traffic and they get like really frustrated. But for me, it was never like, oh, I'm frustrated because my car's moving slow. It was, I'm frustrated because I'm late and I feel like I'm going to let the people that I'm meeting down by not being late, or they're going to think like, oh, he's not reliable or dependable to get here on time. So me, I'm blaming the exterior, like, stimulus, which is, oh, the traffic. Like I have to find something to blame, or else that's true about me. Like I'm not dependable, I'm not on time, I wasn't prepared. Like there's so many things that, like, I think anger especially comes up where it's like it's a self-defense emotion a lot of the time, of like, I don't want someone to think that this is my fault, so I'm gonna be mad.
Yeah. And on the topic of like showing up late to things, like people who constantly do that, I was listening to a podcast a couple of weeks ago and they brought up that specific thing, and it's like, it's not like those people who are reliably late are doing it to be like bad people or to like be defined or something like that. It's typically those people are also people who tend to see like the best in other people and the best in situations. So they don't necessarily game plan of like, all right, realistically, how long is it going to take me to get there? What if X, Y, and Z happens along the way? They're sort of like blissful about like, oh, I can get there if I leave at this time, but they can't. But they're just optimistic about it. And so
that's interesting.
Yeah, and so it's like, but that tells something about their character, that they see the best in other people when sometimes that's not warranted. Like sometimes, like they're
okay.
They're sort of tracking, like separated from reality of like, oh, this is great. Yeah, I can for sure do that. And they're not doing it to be a bad character or something like that. It's just, they're not totally grasping like, all right, but yeah, that's great that you think that you can do this, but really, can you do this? Like if you step back, just think about it for a minute, like, are you able to go from here to there, do this for like, how long is it going to take you when you're there to do what you're going to do? And then you need to come back and do that. And then you also need to get gas along the way. And then before you come over here, and it's like, all right, well, plan all that out. How long do you think? And then, but they just don't do that.
So what you're telling me is I'm a pessimist, because I'm punctual. As soon as I'm a punctual pessimist, because usually when I make a plan, I think of what are all the things that could go wrong? Like what could keep me from like doing this? Or like, should I just say no because I'm not confident that I can make all this happen? Like it's not necessarily, I never really viewed it as optimism or pessimism. I always saw, I think pessimists like to say we're realists. Yeah. Like I'm going to deal with this broken ass world as it is. And it's like, what if I hit every red light? Like I really need to leave like 30 minutes ahead of time. Yeah. To get where I'm going. Whereas I think what you're saying is this optimist is like, well, if I left 10 minutes before and I, hit every light and there's no traffic on I-4, which is unrealistic. But if you think that way, it's like, oh, I've done it. Clearly I can do it again. And it's like so out of your control. And then you're late. Like, I think that's how I used to operate, is I'm just like, man, if I just catch every green light and just get on the I-4 and there's no traffic and all this stuff, I can get there in 10 minutes. And it's just like, no.
Yeah. And that's, I mean, I would say there is a level of pessimism. It's not incorrect to say that in situations like that you're a realist, because it's like all you're doing is you're factoring in realistically what could happen, not like acts of God. You're not factoring those in, where like, what if this tree falls or this semi overturns and blocks all of northbound I-4 or eastbound I-4, and so you're not pessimistic in that regard, but it's, I mean, this is why, like, I've always thought I would be like a really good like event planner.
Yeah. It's not what's the worst that could happen, it's what might probably happen.
Yeah. And so like when things are like, if I get like, I don't know, with things that I have on my schedule that are weeks or months down the road, I'm already thinking about, all right, when the day comes, what exactly do I need to be doing that day in order to make sure that I can make that thing happen? And I'm like game planning so far in advance to where it's like, why are you thinking about it? It's so dumb to do it, but in my mind, the second I'm invited to something like 2 weeks away, it's like I need to immediately figure this out now so I don't have to do it then. And then after I do that, then I can move on with my life. Which is like a weird way to operate. And not a lot of people operate that way. But this is like the whole, like, I'm an engineer. So I have this, and I'm a 5 on the Enneagram. I need to factor in every single thing so that way if something happens, I can say, I did my due diligence. This is not on me.
Amen to that. As a fellow 5, I feel that deeply. Which, for those of you who are not familiar with the Enneagram, great tool, wonderful. Apparently it's been around for thousands of years. But the 5 is kind of considered the investigator, or is there something else they call it?
I don't know.
I think it's called the investigator in most circles. But one thing on being a 5 that I feel like where there's a common thread between us, and this is definitely where a lot of my negative emotions come from, is like our basic fear, at least according to, I think, the Enneagram Institute, if I'm recalling correctly. The basic fear of the 5 is being incompetent or being seen as incompetent. And like that can like absolutely paralyze me. And then if I'm put in a situation where like I'm not familiar or I'm not like able to, like, okay, being a new husband, this has totally hit me in 1,000 different ways because there's so many things where it's like, oh, hey, can you hang those shelves? I'm like, oh God, I've never really hung shelves before. Like, I should be able to do this, but I'm like, I have to watch 5 YouTube videos so I don't look like an idiot when I go to do this.
Yeah.
But like, that's the fear, is like, if I don't over prepare and I don't think through every little thing that I need to do that way, then it's like, I'm going to feel like an idiot, and I'm going to feel like I'm not worthy if I come across as incompetent. And so I think that is a lot of my anger, is like, I've put myself in a situation where I'm going to look like a fool. Like I'm not living up to whatever that expectation is.
Yeah. Even like on that topic of looking incompetent, it's even with things that I'm 100% sure I know how to do. It's just something, but it might be something that I never do, but I would know how to do it if it happens. So when the time comes, like if I needed to help someone jumpstart their battery, I know full well how to do that. But frankly, I've never actually had to do it. I've been asked a few times, and then it turned out that like I just wasn't able to, like I personally couldn't do it at the moment, or they were like, actually, wait, hang on, my roommate just got home, they'll help me. So just something would come up where I don't actually have to do it. But whenever someone like texts or calls me about that, I think about like, all right, well, let me just review one more time. Okay, it's red dead, red live, black on exposed metal of the somewhere, and it's like
Grounding.
Yeah, and I know that, but being that it's not something that I do every single day, that I'm afraid that if I show up and they're relying on me to help them, and I show up and I just like mess up and the cars explode, something like that happens.
Cars explode.
Yeah.
Michael Bay's version of a jumped car, just explosions everywhere.
Yeah, but then I'll look like a fool, and especially if it's a girl who asked me to do that.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Because we highly value female opinions as men.
Yeah, especially as a single man, where it's like, all right, now's my time. Now's my time
I have to prove my worth as a potential mate here.
Right. But I think kind of going back to talking about sports, I think with me specifically, like over the course of my life, when sort of where that hyper sense of competition comes from has a lot to do with the fact that I'm the youngest of all my brothers, and the closest ones in age are twins, and they're 7.5 years older than me. The other one's 11.5 years older. So to put that in perspective, what that meant is when I was entering middle school, all of my brothers had graduated high school by that point.
They were well on their way.
So what that would mean is like playing video games against them when I'm a kid, or like shooting baskets in the driveway, I would lose every single time solely because of how young I was and how much older they were. So there's nothing I could do. And it's the only way I would win is if they clearly let me win. So I think that instilled a sense of like, okay, I'm tired of losing at this, as I always have done this over my entire life. So with volleyball, basketball, video games, it's like I'm confident in my ability in this. I need to prove myself to everyone, who, by the way, has no idea what has gone on in my life with competition. And yet I think that they know that, but they don't. And so it's like I don't need to prove how good I am at volleyball to my peers. Like,
because in one sense,
who cares?
Who cares? It's like we're a bunch of guys and ladies in our late 20s playing a recreational game.
Yeah.
Like, it's one thing if you're in like a league and it's like, oh, there's stuff up for grabs. And I think honestly with the sports thing, that's where I found a lot of freedom. Was like, I'm like, who am I playing this for? Like, I'm playing this to be with my friends and in community and get some exercise. I'm not like I need to win.
Yeah.
But I enjoy winning. Like, there certainly was like, oh, this is more fun when I'm winning. And I would still have frustration that came up during sporting like events and stuff like that. But I think for me, like, outdoor sports were never as closely tied to my identity, and therefore like that's why I didn't get, like as triggered when we're getting just absolutely slaughtered in a volleyball match,
Yeah.
But sorry, continue.
So I guess my thought is like that because of that, because I grew up losing all the time to my brothers, that I place my identity, one of my idols is winning, which is probably a common idol, I would assume, because
success.
It falls under the category of success, being right, getting your way. However you want to like enter the thesaurus for winning, all the synonyms of that, however people perceive it differently, we all have something under that the winning umbrella that is, I think, idols in probably a lot of our lives. But I place so much of my self-worth in that I lose the idea that, like, I know I'm not defined by how good or bad I am at a sport, or the result of that sport if I am good at it, and if it's a negative result. I know I'm not defined by that. I know I'm solely defined by my identity in Christ, but that doesn't make the pain that I feel when I lose not real.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, it's not saying that.
And so a lot of anger is built into, I guess, losing, particularly because I feel like it's a trend over my life. And so it's like, oh, why can't I conquer this? Why can't I move on from this? And so then if I lose, that's something that I feel like I'm good at. I go home angry because in my mind, I am seen as a failure by those who saw me lose, when I know they don't see me that way. and that goes into like feeding into lies about yourself and not letting Satan have a foothold, that kind of thing. And so it's just really frustrating. So, I guess over your life, when do you see, video games aside, I have a couple points. We'll start with this one. Over your life, video games aside, when do you see yourself most commonly becoming angry?
Yeah. I think this also opens up, I think, an interesting line of thought that I want to make sure we talk about. I want to challenge, I think, kind of the idea that anger is what we would consider a negative emotion. I feel like a lot of people look at it that way.
I was going to get into this.
Yeah. I really think it's important because there are things that I've probably been angry about in my life that, like, it was probably a really good reaction that I'm angry. Like, and even looking at it from a biblical perspective, and the word, or the phrase I always use for this is righteous indignation.
Yep.
Like, there is, if you're bold enough, and I'm one of the people that would claim this, to say that there's absolute truth in the universe.
I agree.
And to say that there are, virtues and values that are worth fighting for and are worth championing, to see those things threatened and or trampled on or put down, like there's like injustice in the world.
For sure.
Not to say that I am some great champion of all things, but like when I see unjust things, like I'm angry. Like when I was in the 3rd grade and 9/11 happened, like I was mad. I was a child. I was scared. I didn't understand necessarily all the things that went into that, but like I know that I was angry because I'm like, why did this happen? Mm-hmm. When my dad passed a few years ago, like I was angry because I didn't understand and also scared. I think that's like a recurring theme is when I get fearful, it's usually because I feel like I've lost control. And so like I'm angry at the circumstance for like taking my sense of control away. Yet it always was that. It's just a sense of control. Mm-hmm. Like very rarely do we really have as much together as we perceive that we have together. There's a lot, and we talked about this in episode 1, where it's like I think that like certain things, like my parents being around, is never going to change. Well, we all have that hard moment where it will change eventually, whether that's like very nicely at the end of life, naturally, or like sometimes suddenly and in ways that you don't expect. And so I think definitely in those moments of like loss of control, my normal is being threatened. Even like the last couple of years with COVID, like I've been angry at like I've got to get a vaccine, or like being told I have to get a vaccine, or like, not to get super political about it, but just like it's like, you don't have control over your life anymore. Like people try to tell you that you don't have control over your life anymore. Like there's these things outside of you that are kind of invading your locus of control. And I think for me that, and also kind of with the competence thing, like I can only trust as far as I can control the situation. Well, I just don't have that much control. So I would say that's definitely kind of a recurring theme in my life, is definitely fear, definitely loss of control in those moments, and just seeing things that I consider to be good and beautiful and truthful in the world being threatened or put down, or like even bullying. I was a huge I think there was definitely in middle school, I took on some qualities of being a bully for like a little bit, and I just really disliked how that made me feel. Mm-hmm. But then like on the opposite side of that, like I just couldn't stand to see like people put down. Like what's funny is like I think my siblings would always get mad at me because I was such a peacemaker as a middle child, where it's like you always take everyone else's side. Like you never let us just like even at the dinner table, it's like they're complaining about somebody. I'm like, well, have you thought about like how they feel? Just like it was just silly stuff. But they would always be mad at me because it's like, it's like you're always taking everyone's side. They always thought I should be like a defense attorney because I always had an argument for everything of like, don't put people down, don't like, tear people apart and all that stuff. And so I'd say those are kind of some of big sticking points is like, especially when it comes to like the truth and the justice of the world, like I recognize that I can value it, and there's things I should be angry at, but ultimately I have to like trust that the Lord's justice is greater than my own in a lot of senses. Kind of makes me think of like Batman Begins, where he's talking about his desire for justice, and Rachel's telling him, it's like, you just want vengeance, not justice. Those aren't the same things. And yeah, I just think there's a lot of interesting parallels when it comes to anger, and whether it's a good emotion, bad emotion, or if it really just is like a flag to show you that something's off somewhere.
Yeah, that is something that was the other point I was going to bring up, was the idea that anger is not always a negative emotion. There is such a thing as righteous indignation, as you were saying, and it occurs a lot of times in the Bible, and particularly one instance is when Jesus goes into the temple and sees that they've turned it into like a flea market, and there's thievery going on and all this kind of stuff, and so he starts flipping the tables, and he's basically saying like, you've turned my father's home into a den of thieves, and so he's angry in that moment, rightfully so. And that is something where, like, but then that it is possible to have to initially go into something with righteous indignation, but then take it too far, and to where it's like, all right, well, you crossed the line, but so you sort of need to figure out where that line is. But anger is not always a negative emotion. There is such a thing as righteous indignation, and I sort of like a lot of that, I think, would most often manifest itself when you perceive injustice, like you were saying, where like for me, a huge thing, something that so to answer my original question, like over my life, where I see anger manifesting itself most commonly, I think over the past several years, outside of like competitions and that kind of thing, it's most often in like the political realm of just like current events. When abortion comes up, the topic of murdering unborn babies, and like how just some people treat it as like they're proud to get an abortion, and it's just like, what are you talking about? Like, there's no. And so I get like this anger about, like, have you no value of the simplest, like how like just human life is so simple to just toss it away as like, oh, this is a clump of cells and that kind of thing, where it's like, no, that's not right. And I think we're and to see how many millions of babies are killed as a result of this, and and so I think about like, well, yeah, this is exactly why God says not to have sex outside of marriage, is because it's to avoid situations like this, to avoid unforeseen pregnancies where where two people have sex, and then it's like, okay, well, the woman gets pregnant, but they weren't necessarily in a place where they're ready for that to happen, and it's like, yeah, so maybe God knew what he was talking about when he said don't do this outside of marriage, and it's to avoid like the hardship of this possibility that like, all right, well, now I'm going to terminate this pregnancy, and it's like this can all be avoided, and like that's something that like makes me angry. It's just, it's like devalued life at its simplest form, and it's like the most helpless of us all is an unborn baby who can't even like speak for itself. That is what most stirs me, and I perceive that as like a huge injustice. And then just what will really make me angry is also, especially over the past few years, like media coverage of current events and their attempts to spin it in an effort, and like clear efforts to try and divide the country, particularly along racial lines, because it's like that is the easiest line to divide us along, because it's like if I knew nothing else about you, I'm pretty confident I know what your race is. And so it's like I see you, and it's like you and I sort of look alike. All right, well, we're on the same team. It's like no. But it's like, well, if you were black and I'm white and I look at you and it's like, well, I know nothing about you other than you're black. So that means I can draw whatever inferences I want, so long as the media keeps spouting things over and over again, where true or otherwise, that it's like, okay, well, if you just say it over and over again, eventually it's gonna be said so much that people are just gonna be like, well, yeah, that must be true. They keep saying it, and it's like, well, no. It's like, no. Don't listen to this. Like, look for yourself. See where, like, does this jive with what like data would suggest or whatever, and like, don't let the media just like have their way, because ultimately they're in a business where they just want people to watch them.
Yeah, it's a ratings game.
It boils down to that. They're under no obligation to tell you what is really happening. They're under no obligation to do anything other than make money
and entertain you.
Yeah. Fear,
keep you engaged.
Yeah, fear sells. If they want to create a sense of panic over something, then unfortunately they're in a position where they're broadcasting what they want to say to millions of people who might not be educated enough to know like when they're just lying to you. And so then like, and then you see that manifest itself like in like, all right, well, how's the country now operating? Well, now New York City is mandating vaccines and they're locking down unvaccinated people, or sorry, I'm splitting two things. Germany is locking down unvaccinated people, and they're like, well, you can't work, can't do anything, you can't go to anything that's not essential until you get the vaccine. And it's like, well, is that the right way to go about this? Is what's going on really that bad that that's the step that needs to be taken, is to like strip people of their freedoms, their basic freedoms, for like, based on what science are you following to suggest that is like what needs to be done? And so, but it's like, but that all boils down to like, all right, well, here's this message that's being sent out into the world, and of like, everyone needs to be afraid of X, Y, and Z, the sky is falling, et cetera, and it's like, is it really? But
yeah, if I have to go through a whole nother, year of different news cycles on such and such a variant is now announced, I'm like, I think we're all fatigued by it personally. Speaking for myself at the very least.
Oh, yeah.
And it's like, I don't think it needs to be, I don't think we need to politicize it of like, if you want a vaccine, go get one. If you don't want one,
sure.
I shouldn't be forced into house arrest.
Yeah.
And so I definitely think I think it delves pretty deep into political lines, but I definitely think what you're saying in regards to, like, I think what you're boiling down the media thing to is like propaganda. Here's a story.
100%.
It's not necessarily true, but it sells, and we can keep coming back to it. And like I think, when it comes down to this idea of righteous indignation or feeling like I'm justifiably angry, everyone's justifiably angry when they feel like they're being lied to.
Yeah. And
some people feel that way when they watch one news channel. Some people feel like that when they watch another one. Some people feel like that when they watch any of them, which I feel like is a growing minority, but quickly becoming a larger amount of people who just don't trust corporate media anymore because they see how divisive it's become. and to know that there's like, oh, there's like, it's like there's not two sides. It's like there's like 6 sides to every story now, and everyone has their own interpretation of it in light of kind of like what they identify with and all that jazz. So, like I think what at the heart of it though is like, yeah, it's like murder is wrong, and we have to like wrestle with those kinds of moral questions. Like lying is wrong. Like there's certain things that we've accepted generally as society, but it's now gotten to the nuances of like, okay, well, what constitutes this and what constitutes that, and certain people will be certainly more angry depending on how they define those values, or like you said, like, you know, the question of, is it a child? Like that is something that is hotly debated, and like that's unfortunate. Like why we wouldn't err on the side of life in that scenario is a little beyond me personally, but at the same time, like, you know, like you're talking about in Germany where people's, you know, freedoms are being taken away, like, you know, there is a perceived freedom of autonomy for your body that is a right that people consider. And then, you know, we get to what you talked about, like the chicken and the egg problem of like, is there a set of ethics and morals that would eliminate this possibility before we even had to make these incredibly difficult decisions? Yeah, I think that's a whole nother set of circumstances, but I definitely think that, yeah, there's plenty there that could spur anger, and certainly has. Like, you know, you turn on the news and these are the things that people are getting riled up about. So like I think there's definitely a sense of I think one thing that kind of runs through each of those topics at some level that I think is an idol for us in the West in our kind of radically individual society now is the idol of what we perceive to be freedom, whether it's like bodily freedom or political freedom of movement. There's a lot of things that we take for granted in the United States that are like new, is from like an anthropological standpoint of like, oh yeah, you have a Bill of Rights. Like there's certain things the government can't do to you. Like you're born with these. Like you can't have this stripped from you. Like that is, you know, still relatively, and I always take like kind of a long view of history and say like, yeah, that's pretty new. Like maybe it's not new, maybe it's always been there, but our recognition of it is new. And all the difficulty and nuance that comes with like, you know, structuring society around people that have freedom is hard. Like it's not an easy thing to do. Like certainly autocracy is an easier way to organize society, but you lose that freedom aspects. And I think a lot of people have kind of put freedom as that pedestal of, you can't tell me what to do and I can do whatever I want to do. And I think that Tim Keller puts it really well when he says, I think it's him, is that true freedom is not a lack of restraint. True freedom comes from choosing the right restraints, which I think is true. Like we all agree on that socially when we pass laws, because we're all agreeing, you know, at least through our representative form of democracy, the people that represent us have all agreed that this is a good way for us to govern ourselves. And we can change it later if we need to. And so I think that is a good thing to kind of recognize that this is kind of universally accepted, that we all accept restraint at some level. Yeah. It's determining which of those restraints are good and which ones are not. And ultimately, a lot of people feel threatened when someone's going to say, you have the right to do this or you don't have the right to do that. Yeah. And I guess to that point of restraint, it's like, yeah, you are free to, you can do literally anything your body is capable of doing. Is that freedom though? Like, you can kill yourself if you want. Is that what freedom looks like? It's like, okay, you're certainly not free from consequence. Yeah, you are. Exactly. But and then just to, I guess, put a bow in the whole United States concept is like, what makes me angry is like seeing people who are willing to give up their own freedoms and to like
give it all back to government. It's like the founding fathers would be rolling in their graves. It's like they literally blew people's heads off over taxes. But to see, it's like whoa, before you're so quick to give up your basic freedoms of like being able to go to a restaurant or what, name it, honestly, it's like, where else in the world are you truly free to, like, where does freedom of speech exist elsewhere in the world? Like true freedom of speech.
Well, some would even argue it's not completely here, so it is one of those nuanced things. I think most people accept that it's generally the West is higher on the freedom of speech. Luxembourg, I've heard good things about. Liechtenstein, pretty much anything.
Yeah,
anything surrounding France seems to be pretty good.
Yeah, and it's like, okay, but these are just, they're so basic. To be able to say what you want, quote unquote, do what you want, but to see people give that up back to government because the government says we're taking this from you, and to not just at least cause a stir and be like, whoa, no, you're not. That's something that is recently has been giving me like a lot of anger, is just like, you're free, act like it, like don't regress into history. And anyway, so,
well, I was gonna say maybe we put some of the biblical frame on this and talk about kind of where anger sits in Scripture.
Yeah.
And yeah, we can tie it in. Okay.
Yeah, so I've pulled up a few verses here, and honestly, I mean, there's so many. So I was just like, you know what, this is fine. It could go on for days, though. So here we go. Psalm 37:8. Refrain from anger and forsake wrath. Fret not yourself. It tends only to evil. Psalm 103:8. The Lord is merciful and gracious, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love. Proverbs 14:29. Whoever is slow to anger has great understanding, but he who has a hasty temper exalts folly. Proverbs 19:11. Good sense makes one slow to anger, and it is his glory to overlook an offense. Ecclesiastes 7:9. Be not quick in your spirit to become angry, for anger lodges in the bosom of fools. James 1:19 and 20. Know this, my beloved brothers, let every person be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger, for the anger of man does not produce the righteousness of God. And Ephesians 4:26 and 27. Be angry and do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your anger, and give no opportunity to the devil. A theme here seems to be slow to anger.
Slow to anger. Temperance. Not being temperamental.
I mean, a lot of those verses they're not saying do not ever be angry, but it's like, don't immediately jump to it, especially when it's like, well, all right, let me pull myself back from the situation. What's really going on here? Is this something that truly warrants being angry about? Like, God is slow to anger. It's similar to like how a parent is supposed to operate, where it's quite all right to be angry at your kids, provided they're doing something that is like putting themselves in danger or something, or other people in danger, and it's like completely reckless. And then it's like, so the anger coming from the parents on that end is because it's not because they have no business being angry at it, but it's like that anger is coming out of love, of like, look what you're doing to yourself or to other people, and I love you, and you're putting yourself in a position where like you could be killed or go to jail or something like that, where like, yeah, that would be something that momentarily would be okay being angry with the person over, because it is a righteous anger, and it's coming entirely out of love for the person, and you're kind of just like trying to like shake them awake and be like, what are you doing? So, but what they're getting at is like, okay, don't don't get angry over video games. Don't get angry over volleyball. Don't get angry over something that's stupid. It's like, be slow to anger, but it doesn't mean it's not that doesn't mean anger's necessarily always a bad thing.
Yeah, no, I'd agree. And I think, one of the things is, it usually talks about anger kind of in like this human, selfish sense, which I would agree. Like, we should not, like, I think what Scripture outlines is that there's fewer instances than we probably choose to be angry that are kind of like an acceptable level of anger. And that's why I think that there's kind of this call to be slow to anger, because I do think there's, a strong inclination to kind of temper anger, because it is, I think, one of the most impulsive emotions, in the sense of when I'm like, usually when we're sad, like that can lead to anger, but when we're sad, we usually like withdraw ourselves. It's not great, but it's like usually, that brings us kind of like, very rarely do I feel like I'm taking my sadness out on other people. Yeah. But like my anger, like if it's truly like unbridled, and I would say like unbridled anger is like rage, where it's just like, you've lost sense. Like, that's not good. Like, that's not healthy. That's, you're completely condemning yourself to the consequences of whatever actions come next. And usually they're not good. Mm-hmm. So I think like the cool thing about the verses you chose, like a lot of them come out of like Proverbs, where it's like, this is a book of compiled wisdom, where it's like, follow these ideas and they will generally serve you very well. And this idea of being slow to anger is like, am I being triggered to action prematurely? Am I not fully considering what the consequences are? Am I not acting with a heart of love and mercy, even though I have a feeling of anger? It's like, even though I feel the anger, again, it's kind of like, for me, it's like that signpost of like, okay, something maybe isn't right here, but is the correct response to be angry and have that like visceral reaction that anger demands? Or, you can even look at the full gospel story of like, we deserve God's wrath, but instead of that, he sends Christ. Yeah. It's like, this is what you deserve. Here's what I'm going to give you instead. And it's full of grace and mercy, and doesn't negate the fact that there's a situation that demands anger and justice and, in a lot of ways, wrath. But I think Scripture highlights that ultimately God is the one who decides what is just and what is right truly, and we merely reflect that. Mm-hmm. And so I definitely think, especially looking at the ministry of Jesus, like we can always look at the money changers in the temples and be like, yeah, he did get angry. Like, there certainly were moments he was angry. He was human and God all in one. Yet there's very few other places we can find him be that way. We find him usually very patient, very merciful, very much bearing with people, and people that he disagreed with too. Like, I think that's kind of a big theme there is, he's constantly in these arguments and fights, more or less arguments with like the Pharisees and the Sadducees, the other religious leaders at the time. And you don't see him have those outbursts because he's seeking for people to be enlightened and understand, and that comes so much better from a position and disposition of like mercy and grace and love. Like, that's the motivation. It's not coming out of a place of anger. Like, he didn't come here ticked off. Yeah. He came here to save. And ultimately he was that instrument of justice. So I think that's my thoughts on it.
Yeah, and I think there's also something to be said about, like, if you're in a situation where people, like, you're around people and they expect you to have a reaction to something that is anger, but instead of that, your reaction is very calm and measured. That speaks volumes, because it's like totally against the grain of what culture would dictate, like how you react, how someone should react to a certain thing. And it's almost like, whoa, look at this. Look how calm he is about this. That's kind of impressive. And that is a lot of what Jesus did when he's talking to Pharisees and Sadducees. Is he could just be like, you guys are idiots. But instead the whole point is because he knows when he was talking to them, like ultimately he wasn't changing their hearts, but it was always around other people who were watching, knowing like, okay, I'm physically speaking to this person, but really I'm speaking to these people through the words I'm saying to this person and how I'm saying it. And just, I don't know, to put a bow on the whole thing, like you were saying, we deserve God's wrath. We deserve the full extent of it because man is fallen, man is sinful, God is perfect, and there's no way but because we are created by God to be in a relationship with him, and whether both parties want this to happen, because of what man has done over time and introducing sin into the world, that even if we want to get to God, there's no possible way, because he exists on this plane of perfection that us as imperfect beings, it's completely unattainable. And it's like, I think of it like, okay, if I wanted to swim from Florida to the United Kingdom, whatever.
Pretty unattainable.
It's like, all right, here I go. I'm going to give it my best shot. And probably like half a mile in, I'll pass away. I'm just exhausted.
Especially off the coast of Florida, sharks and such.
Yeah, and it's like, even if there weren't sharks, but it's like, there are waves, there might be a storm, and also it's thousands of miles of swimming. You're not going to do it. But even the best swimmer, like if Michael Phelps was going to give it a go, he could probably get further than I could, but he's going to fail and die because it's impossible.
This might be my favorite analogy for living up to the perfection, the righteousness of God. Try swimming from Florida to the UK.
Yeah.
You can't.
Yeah. But that is emblematic of like how far removed from God we are in terms of, because of our sin, it has put us on this plane where it's impossible. There's not one person can ever do this, not even the best person. That's why the gospel has nothing to do with how good or bad you are or how many great things you've done in your life. Doesn't matter, because ultimately everyone falls short of the glory of God. But it has everything to do with what Jesus did on the cross, because he lived a life we were supposed to live, and he died the death we deserve to die. And because of that, we are now able to, he now offers us a ticket on a plane to go from Florida to the UK.
Much better than swimming.
Sounds fantastic. I can get on, I can take a nap.
This is like Concorde, like business class plane. This is nice.
Put your feet up. Yeah, Air Emirates. You're just
exactly.
You have your own pod. You have TV. And it's like, yeah. But then that's what's crazy about it is like, really, it's that simple? Yeah, it is. It is that simple. It's he's offering us a ticket. It's already paid for. It's first class. And this is the only way to do it. The only way to get there. It's like, do you want this ticket? Yeah, I'll take the ticket. It's like, are you willing to accept me as your pilot? Yeah, I can do that. It's like, okay, cool. Like, oh, that's it. Are you willing to accept that there's no possible way you can swim there on your own? Yes. Yeah. Okay, cool.
I accept this.
I accept this very obvious reality.
Yeah. This might be the most interesting gospel analogy I've ever been a part of, so I'm very grateful.
I didn't come up with it. I don't remember who did.
Oh, really? This is something you've heard before.
I heard about it. It might be Tim Keller.
Really? Talked about swimming from the Florida to the UK?
No, but not necessarily.
But across the Atlantic Ocean or some incredible body of water?
It could be Tim Keller. It could be someone else. I distinctly remember hearing this when I was going on a mission trip to Europe.
Gotcha.
Coming from Florida. And it was, I don't know who came up with it. Doesn't matter.
No, it does not. But I'm glad that it's out there.
So if you came out with it, shout out to you. I don't know who you are, though. Yes. But there you go. It's like, we don't deserve the ticket on that plane. We deserve to try and swim that on our own and die in the process. But because God is slow to anger, because he desires to have that relationship with us, and he desires that so much and loves us so much that he knows the only way for this to happen is if he makes it happen. And if he comes to us and bridges that gap and takes us there. And that's what he did when Jesus came to earth, lived like a person. And so God is not removed from us. It's not like he doesn't care.
He's incarnate. Yeah.
Yeah, he physically lived as a person on earth and did that, and didn't have to do that, but did that solely because he loved us and desired that relationship with us. So that is our encouragement to you. If you don't know Jesus, there's the gospel. And
we're accepting standbys right now.
Yeah,
if you're in the terminal and you're looking to get a first class flight on Emirates,
there's a whole lot of standby seats.
Yeah.
But yeah, so the end.
Thanks for joining us. Always appreciate this opportunity to kind of chat about how these emotions have manifested in our lives, and honestly, where biblical truth has some rays of light to shed on it. So thanks for hosting, Connor. Appreciate you.
Yeah. And if you do play volleyball with me after you see this, please remind me of episode 2 before I start playing, just in case. See ya.
See ya.